Greetings, this is TK85341 and today I'm going to show you how to build your own mechanical droid mech arm. It's gonna be fun. Let me show you how to get started. It's over here.
The 3D files to print out the mech arm pieces can be found on the Creative Mechanics Etsy storefront. Or, if you don't have a 3D printer and want to save some time, mech arm kits are also routinely available there as well. I'll include a link in the description.
Keep in mind that there are several ways to sand, paint, and prime a prop such as this. The method I'm going to show you is just how I prefer to do it. It's not the right way, but it is an effective way.
The first step is to adhere the forearm pieces together. You can attach them with super glue, epoxy, or even melt them together using a soldering iron. Just make sure that you align them correctly together with each other. Once all the pieces are whole and sturdy, it is time to start smoothing out the surface. To do this, you're going to need a few supplies, such as Bondo fiberglass resin, gloves, measuring cups, paintbrushes, a mixing spoon, and probably some kind of a respirator or breathing mask, because resin fumes are awful and I think it smells terrible and you should not do this inside. Do it outside. Before applying the resin, I like to give the 3D printed pieces a nice sanding pass first. I'm going to start by using 80 grit sandpaper. This isn't to smooth out the surface, but instead give a nice, rough textured surface for the resin to better adhere to. Trust me, it is impossible to sand out PLA filament, though many have tried. Once the surface has been equally roughed up, it's time for the fiberglass resin. Please read the instructions on the bottle first. Skipping steps will result in goopy, uncured resin that will never wash off. For this Bondo mix, add 10 drops of hardener with every 1 ounce of resin. Stir for 30 to 60 seconds, scraping the bottom and the sides of the measuring cup frequently. You then have about 8 minutes of working time before the mixture begins to harden. Using a disposable paintbrush, give the entire model a generous but even coat. Make sure it gets into all the cracks and the crevices and it doesn't drip or pool. And be quick about it, it's gonna harden sooner than you think. And it should take about 2 hours to completely cure and harden, though colder temperatures will make this step take much longer.
Whew, that wasn't so hard.
Once the resin has hardened, it is time to return to our trusty friend, the power sander. Again, you could do this by hand with sandpaper, but it would take way more time than you are willing to spend. Again, I'm starting with 80 grit sandpaper, but you could use as fine as 120 grit for this step if you'd like. Now we're really going to focus on getting an even, clean surface. It won't be perfect, but take as much time as you need to hide the 3D printer lines. See any print lines? Get back to sanding, you lazy fiend. And also, keep an eye on your sandpaper. Resin has a really bad habit of gunking it up quickly. I went through a few disposable sheets just sanding on this batch alone. Once the pieces are sufficiently smooth, it's time for the fillable sandable primer. This spray filler comes in several brands and they all work pretty equally well. This paint is your best friend. It both fills up the small scratches and dents and lays down the perfect paint primer. Woo! Again, give the pieces a generous yet even coat. Take your time to make sure there's no drips or streaks. Cover all those crevices. And if one coat hasn't covered the model completely, wait about 20 minutes and give it a second spray coat. Now that your model is in a neutral gray tone, you can really start to see the imperfections in your model. Those will be sanded out very soon. But before we get back to sanding, let's fill in the big gaps and hide some of the larger seam lines with some Bondo spot putty. For this step, you can also use wallpaper paste, wood filler, and really any other construction pastes for this step. But most makers will agree that Bondo is the easiest and the best option. It dries very quickly and sands remarkably well. As per the spray can's instructions, give your pieces the appropriate time to cure. Want to know the best way to tell if your spray paint has been fully cured? It's the smell. If you can still smell strong paint fumes coming off your object, it usually needs more cure time. Pro tip: once the primer paint has totally dried, it's time for, you guessed it, more sanding. But this time, I'm going to wet sand them. You could use the power sander again, But wet sanding with water gives the surface a sublime, smooth texture. It's just like shaving in the shower. It's so easy. So I'm going to start with 180 grit sandpaper, but we'll soon move up to 400 and maybe even 800 grit sandpaper. You may be tempted to use 1000 or higher grit sandpaper to get a pristine metallic shiny texture, but know this, the smoother a surface is, the harder it is for paint to adhere to it. My personal max grit is 800. Sand everything until it looks even, clean, and smooth. Look how pretty that looks. If the surface quality is not living up to your standards, spray the model again with the filler primer, followed by another pass with the Bondo putty. It's not unusual to repeat this step 2, 3, 4, or even more times. Spray, spot putty, and sand until you are satisfied.
This step can be repeated as many times as necessary to get your print as smooth and clean and pristine as you desire.
Before we paint the mech arm, don't forget to add on the greeblies. These pieces are only for decoration and can be super glued or hot glued onto the mech arm. Use as many or as little as you want, wherever you want. Or even use your own plastic parts, I don't care, just have fun! This is your personalized piece. Now the part you've all been waiting for, the paint job. Again, there is 100 ways to paint and age props, but lately I've been obsessed with masking and texturing paint on the fly, while it's still wet. Let me explain. First, I'll spray down a dark coat, such as a black spray paint coat, into the crevices and the recessed parts of the mech arm. I'm keeping this first layer very light. Then, while it's still wet, I'll follow with the main color, which for this arm is metallic copper, applying an even spray, then methodically dabbing away at it with a plastic bag to reveal the black layer underneath it. It's pretty cool. You can also use painter's tape or sometimes even just balls of paper to get other cool textures, but today I'm really digging the trash bag approach. Apply more base paint, dab, add more shadow paint, dab, and just use your best judgment. You may be tempted, but don't overdo it. Remember, less is more. And finally, to spruce up the color a little bit, I'll spritz on a lighter gold shade. Doesn't that look good? And it was so easy. I'm pretty satisfied with how the copper arm is looking, so now I'll move on to the second arm. I'm going to paint this one with a more subdued steel color, but I'll keep the same method. A dark black undercoat, followed by the base coat, and then dab away with the trash bag while everything is still wet. And then I'll just repeat and spritz and spray until everything looks good. And don't forget to paint the fingers and the hand plates as well. I almost forgot myself. These mech arms don't completely cover up your human arm and leave large gaps that I want to fill with wires and other cool robot-looking innards. So I'll take a black arm sleeve and the black glove and use colored puffy paint to artificially paint wires up and down the sleeve. This way, it gives the impression of messy internal wiring, but it won't take up much space, the wires won't tangle up with each other, and they'll stay exactly where you paint them. And the best part is, it's still stretchy and flexible, even when it dries. Once the glove and the sleeve are painted, it's time for assembly. To attach the finger and hand plates to the glove, I just like to hot glue them on. For accuracy, I'll even wear the glove while doing this, but very carefully. Doing it this way is one step away from a heat burn. But while attaching the parts like this, I can anticipate how the pieces will move when I bend my fingers, and I'll know that it'll be accurate to my hand. So take your time, line everything up to the best of your ability. Oh, but we're not finished painting yet. It's time for detail painting and additional weathering. I'll start by using a chrome paint marker, the kind usually found at craft stores, to add silver accents to the greebles and recesses of the arm. You can also use a paintbrush for this step, but the marker is so much faster and looks fantastic. Next, I'll use a rough paintbrush with rough bristles and cheap acrylic paint to start weathering the cracks, crevices, and indents of the arm. Why use the cheapest acrylic paint? Because it smudges easy and wipes off easy, aka it's very forgiving. I prefer to use the fancier, more potent acrylic paint when I'm painting solid color areas. So I'll start with black shading, then use brown and burnt umber colors to add more warmth and color variation. Again, have fun with this step, but remember that less is more. You don't want to overkill your paint job. And finally, we will add a clear coat to prevent the paint from washing away or getting scraped off. There's a massive variety of clear coats to use, from paint varnish to 2K spray, but my personal favorite clear coat for metal and metallic surfaces is floor wax. That's right, standard floor wax that I filled a spray bottle with. It's cheap and still allows chrome and metal paint jobs to retain their beautiful shine. Other clear coats, such as Krylon or Rust-Oleum gloss clear coats, look great on solid colors, but if you use it for a metallic paint, it will totally kill the surface and make it look gray. You don't want to make that mistake. Always test your clear coats on a test piece if you are unsure. And I discovered you can be very generous with the application of the floor wax. Just make sure again that there's no water streaks or liquid buildup. To help prevent this, and to speed up the drying process, I'm gonna use a heat gun. Goodbye, gooey sauce.
It's gonna be weird, but stick with it.
Allow the clear coat to dry, and then pull out that chunk of furniture foam that came with your mech arm kit. Test fit the mech arm on yourself. Take note of the empty areas inside. Cut out pieces of the furniture foam and hot glue them inside. The foam's purpose is to make sure the prop won't slide off your arm and won't pinch your skin. If something isn't quite fitting right, tear out the foam and try again. Be creative with the foam placement. And this final step is optional, but you can drill holes to add elbow pins to the mech arm, just like C-3PO. I personally don't do this for my Rogue Stormtrooper mech arm, but it really does add to the realism of the droid mechanics. I'm using thumbtacks, but you can use nails, wire, or really anything that can pivot on a hole. Try it out!
And just like that, you have yourself your own mechanical droid arm that's ready for action, or, in my case, after action, because I'm pretty sure I lost one or maybe both of these limbs in a terrible, horrific accident. These mechanical droid arms are truly one of the best ways to upgrade your arsenal. Whether you're a Remnant Trooper, a Mandalorian, or your own Galactic Denizen, I cannot recommend these more. Stay sharp, troopers. Keep your eyes to the sky. And remember, may the Force be with you. Unless you're a Stormtrooper, then long live the Empire. Unless you're someone else. I don't even know what else to say.